And now, ladies and gentlemen, Chris Hansen and David Ferriero.
Can I tell you how nice it is to walk into a room where people aren't running out the back door? And to interview somebody like David Ferriero, who is probably not going to be sweating much because he's on friendly territory here. But it's an honor to have you, sir.
Honored to be here. Love libraries.
So I have to ask you the first question. Have you ever been arrested for a felony?
You know, there were 7 teams of FBI agents spread out across the country doing the background checks on me for my confirmation hearing.
And you passed?
And I kept getting these emails from friends saying, what is going on? Because the FBI was only allowed to tell them it was not a criminal investigation. So at Duke, they actually had a pool going to figure out what position it was that I was being investigated for.
That's wonderful. Well, we are in a nice group of people here, a very smart group of people, but I would hazard to say that not everybody really has a grasp on what the National Archives actually is.
You think?
I'm guessing. Enlighten us.
You know, the very first archivist of the United States, Robert Connor, who was a faculty member, history faculty member at the University of North Carolina, whose papers are at North Carolina, and I've become a huge fan of his, read everything that he's ever written, had the same problem that I do. When he was introduced to people in Washington, this is the new archivist, blank stares. What is an archivist? And I get the same kinds of questions. So as the archivist, I am responsible for the records of the country. So I have a special niche in terms of archival work that's related to all the material that's generated in the federal agencies, in the executive branch, and in the White House.
Now, as a journalist, I've never met a classified document I didn't like. In 2009, President Obama tasked you with essentially going through classified documents and deciding which one should be unclassified. I mean, I cannot imagine accomplishing that task. I'm just
Especially when I tell you it's 400 million pages.
400 million.
And I have a deadline of December 31st, 2013 to accomplish this.
How do you even get your arms around that?
It's been an interesting process, and it's a piece of the job I had no idea that I would have any responsibility for, because it wasn't part of the interview process. We didn't talk about
Oh, and
classified.
by the way.
Yeah, right. I have very good staff who have created a process. The executive order that was issued basically gives me the authority, mandate, to bring together the stakeholders, the agencies which classified the documents to begin with. So it's not as if the archives is declassifying them. It's the archivist encouraging the original agencies to take a second look at that. The executive order spells out 2 categories of information: weapons of mass destruction and national security, the only 2 criteria by which it can remain classified. We engage the public in several forums to advise us on what records are most important to their research. I had 2 open meetings in Washington that I hosted to get some sense from the historians and the research community about of all the records in that 400 million page backlog, going back to World War I, which are most important for you? Where should we establish the priorities to engage the community in this process? And both I wish I had videos of this, both meetings, the outcome was exactly the same. The room, as large as this, was evenly split between the Kennedy assassination conspiracy and UFOs.
Site 51. Give me a sense for some of the classified documents that have been unclassified.
So we have, we're actually making good progress. We've reviewed about 200 million pages, and we have In those that have gone through the thorough process with the agencies, we have released 91% of them. They're now
91%?
91% have been released. And I'm so proud that the 6 oldest, which were 1917, 1918, finally the CIA caved on them.
And what were those documents, actually?
They're hysterical. There's 6 German formulas for invisible ink.
And that remained unclassified since 1917?
CIA had been FOIA'd to death for access to these 6 documents. They refused to release them. And let me tell you how it happened. Leon Panetta had released a press statement bragging about releasing these, and
The former director of the CIA.
the former director of the CIA, yes, one of his last acts. But what he didn't say is, so why did you decide now, after all these years, to release them? And it's because my staff, using Google Books, discovered that these things had actually been published in 1931.
So they've been out there all these years.
And for me, having come from the New York Public Library, where I spent 5 years working on Google Books, this was so wonderful.
Now, you serve Congress, you serve the American people, you serve the White House. How does that get divided in terms of your responsibilities?
The work is governed by 2 sets of laws, the Federal Records Act and the Presidential Records Act. The Federal Records Act gives the guidance on all of the records that are created in the 275 federal agencies of the government. And the Presidential Records Act governs everything that's created in the White House. In the middle are the records of Congress, which are owned by the Congress. I do not have legal custody of them. I provide courtesy storage for them. So I have 3 different kinds of records that I'm responsible for, and I have 3 different kinds of staff who are responsible for them. And there's no mixing. They're secure vault areas for each of the kinds of records, and there's no cross-fertilization of staff in the spaces.
Presidential libraries. There are 13. You're responsible for them all.
I am.
Each one of those former presidents has a family
Yes.
who very much cares about the president's legacy.
That's right.
And I can only imagine some of the discussions you've had with people in terms of what goes in, what stays out, and how it's all organized, and how it's all promoted.
It's not much of a conversation about what goes in, because everything
goes in.
Yeah, it's what's made public, what's made available, and that's governed by that set of laws, the Presidential Records Act, which specifies the release of the records over a period of time. The president has the opportunity to identify areas of records, like those that are personal, family kinds of records that they can keep secure, limit access to for a number of years. 5 years after the administration changes, the Presidential Records Act authorizes eligibility for FOIA requests, Freedom of Information access requests. So we're very busy now working on the processing the Bush 43 records to make them available on the January 20th, 2014. The interesting tensions in presidential libraries have to do with 3 kinds of stakeholders that I would characterize. The National Archives, the foundation, which is created to build the presidential library, private foundation, and the family. And the best situation is when all of those 3 partners like each other and work well together.
What's your favorite presidential library? Off the record. In front of a small group of 100 people and a video camera.
Lincoln,
Lincoln.
because it's not mine. No, I love aspects of each one of them, but I can tell you these are each one of them has a story, has a story to tell. A good example. You probably read in the press that we recently opened a new Watergate exhibit at the Nixon Library. So over this period of time, all those Nixon records have been, opened. We have more information now about that presidency than we ever had. 150 oral histories of folks in the Nixon White House to really tell the story in a library where the story really hadn't been told. A couple of panels that kind of alluded to the recent unpleasantness of Watergate, but didn't really tell the story. And that was the first thing that I dealt with as the Archivist of the United States, was working with the foundation, the family, and my own staff to plan this new exhibit.
That had to be challenging.
Incredibly challenging. But I encourage you to get out to Yorba Linda and take a look at this exhibit, because it's extraordinary. And for me, the best part of it is that it puts it in context of this kind of activity through 5 different administrations. There's one panel, pictures of the Oval Office and pictures of the executives, some of the spaces in the executive office, and then photographs of the 5 presidents down the left side, and you can push the button for a particular president, and the bugs will light up on the panel. So you can see where the microphones were hidden in these spaces in 5 different administrations. So this wasn't, this wasn't just Nixon.
No, it's gone on in every administration.
Right.
What is the most interesting document you've seen that you didn't realize existed in the National Archives?
I have 44 facilities around the country, from Anchorage, Alaska to Atlanta, Georgia. And I have been on a campaign to get into every single one of them, so I can get to meet my staff and get some sense of the records. And I've been into 41 of them so far, and I can tell you that in each one of them, there is stuff that just knocks my socks off. It's an amazing, amazing array of materials. When you remember that the archives opened its doors in 1935, that what we have of record before 1935 that has survived, horrible storage conditions. They were stored in attics and cellars, subject to fire, theft, flood, all kinds of problems. The night before the British burned the town, Dolly Madison told her husband, get the Declaration of Independence out of town. Wow. Rolled up in a linen sack, taken into the mountains of Virginia to protect it.
And you have that.
And we have it, yes. So it's just amazing that we have what we have. So to answer the question, what's my favorite, it depends on what day it is. But
you have some examples.
I brought some examples.
You just happen to have props.
Because I do have a lot of favorites. And Alice, these are for you. I'll leave them with you, and you can do a little display after it. And so
that's great. Yeah.
These are facsimiles. So you all know that we bought Alaska, right?
See,
you know that from history.
To me. We chatted last night, and this was the first example David brought up.
But I bet you don't know that there's actually a check for the purchase of Alaska, drawn on the Riggs Bank in Washington, made out to the Russians, endorsed by the Russians.
In
So
Russian.
They took this thing to Riggs Bank and walked out with $7.2 million in gold.
May I see? That's amazing.
This is a letter from a 12-year-old kid in Cuba to President Franklin Roosevelt, asking for, if you like, give me a $10 bill, green American, in the letter, because never I have not seen a $10 bill, green American, and I would like to have one of them. My address is Senor Fidel Castro.
Oh, my goodness.
Yes. Now, if only he had sent him that $10.
Could have avoided the whole Cuban Missile Crisis, right? That's great.
This is a wonderful letter to President William McKinley from Annie Oakley. Look at that letterhead.
Wow.
And she's offering to supply a company of 50 lady sharpshooters who will supply their own ammunition and arms to fight the Spanish-American War. So I was, I was at the New York Public Library and at Duke University. Both have fantastic Walt Whitman collections. Walt Whitman worked in the Bureau of Indian Affairs during the Civil War, and when I discovered that I have in my possession all of the records, civilian personnel records, anyone who ever worked in the government, I have their records, I asked to see Walt Whitman's personnel file. And in it is a 4-page letter of recommendation. He was applying for another job in government, written by Ralph Waldo Emerson. So in the summer of 1959, the Eisenhowers visited Buckingham Palace and spent, Balmoral, and spent a week with the Queen, and apparently fell in love with her scones, which she made herself. And apparently promised to send the recipe, because in January, here's the letter that she wrote to President Eisenhower, thanking him for the visit and apologizing for taking so long, to send her recipe for scones. Is that great?
That's wonderful.
And two more. I should tell you also about that letter to President Roosevelt. The presidential libraries save correspondence. So if you have written a letter to one of the presidents, starting with Truman, we should have it in our collection. And the way I found out about that is when I met with the directors of the presidential libraries for the first time. They went around the room and introduced themselves, and Tom Putnam from the JFK reached into his briefcase and handed me a facsimile of a letter that a kid wrote to JFK asking for information about the proposed Peace Corps. It's a letter from me.
Well, that's great.
It was a great moment, but even greater was watching the faces of the other 12 directors, because they were like, oh my God, how am I going to top this? And 2 weeks later, the Eisenhower called to say they'd found 2 letters from me to President Eisenhower.
Wow, that's wonderful.
And when I visited the LBJ, they handed me a copy of the letter that I sent to LBJ congratulating him for signing the Civil Rights Act.
That's great. You know, we often lament the fact that our children have horrible cursive handwriting because everybody emails and texts now. In terms of, maintaining letters and things that people send today, what kind of a challenge does that present to you now that it's all electronic and very little of it is on paper anymore?
There's still a fair amount of paper correspondence coming into the White House, as well as a lot of electronic. So we're still in, and will be for some time, this bimodal mode. So we're trying hard to ensure that we're capturing. We're actually scanning all the correspondence now coming into this White House is scanned. So we have it automatically when it arrives. So we're going to be collecting that electronically. Where I thought you were going with this, which is now a huge problem for us, is that kids, a lot of kids today can't read cursive. And all of the documents that we have, of course, are in cursive. So we're now experimenting with some software that actually automatically transcribes cursive to compensate for that.
Now, in the age of digitalization, are we at the point where any one of us in this room can go online and go to the National Archives and take a look at that check for $7.2 million?
Yeah, there are several ways.
That's pretty amazing when you think about it.
There are several ways you can do it. We have something called the Online Public Access tool. If you go to the archives.gov website, you'll be able to search our catalog, basically. And the first thing that you'll see when you search for something, whatever the subject is, you'll get a thumbprint image of the scanned document itself. We've got, I should tell you, however, it's a very small percentage of what we have. We have 12 billion pages of record, about 40 million photographs, miles and miles of film and video, and lots of electronic communication.
Do you ever get overwhelmed by it all?
Every day.
I mean, I can't imagine.
Well, it's I scare the staff someday because I say, how could we possibly know we have 12 billion? Let's do an inventory.
And how much new material comes in on an annual basis?
So that's a very good question. The 275 agencies I told you within the federal government, each one of them has someone who has the responsibility for records management. And that person works with my staff to create a record schedule, which basically describes the kind of records that are created in that agency, and a disposition schedule. They have a useful life, 7 years perhaps, for personnel records or whatever. So categorize the kinds of records, and then only 2 to 3% of those records that are created have legal or historic value that warrant them being deposited at the archives. So 98% of those are destroyed after their useful life.
98%.
But that translates into about 1 billion pages a year coming in paper
And
to
give
the
me a
National
sense
Archives.
for the breakdown of where these documents come from.
Department of Energy, Department of Defense, you know, you name the agency, that's where they're coming from.
What role do you think local libraries, like this one, play in the preservation of historic documents? I mean, obviously, you're going to share copies of these today, which will be put on display and very informative to everybody in this room and our children. But I would think there's an important role there.
I think I had a quick tour today, so I haven't pushed on this one, but I think lots of public libraries have local history collections where you're preserving, you know, the record of the town, whether they're oral histories, photographs, family histories that document what life was like in the town. So there's a role there. I'm talking to as many groups as I can to educate folks about what we do, so that you have some idea of your records are available to you. You have access to your records, because most people don't understand that.
What's your proudest accomplishment?
Wow. I inherited an agency which was incredibly bureaucratic. That might be a surprise to you. that this federal
Shocking.
government-
Washington, so much gets done there every day.
But I also came in under an administration with a mandate for open government, which has the principles of transparency, collaboration, and participation. So it gave me the leverage I needed to basically turn my agency upside down, to let us focus on who's the customer, put the customer in the middle of what we're doing rather than the record, which is how the agency operated before. And how can we create a nimble agency that's much more responsive to the needs of our customer?
What is it about your job that makes you excited to get up every morning and go there?
It's a combination of the folks I'm working with, the records that I'm dealing with, and frankly, it's the electronic future. It's the digitization activities and understanding them, pushing on them, encouraging my staff to get out there in front of them, because we have a responsibility for guiding the government in terms of their uses of technology and the records implications of the technologies that they're using, Twitter and Facebook and blogs and all of those things.
What's the most important thing you want these people to know about the National Archives?
They're your records, and if you haven't used them, there's something for every one of you in those records, whether you're doing genealogy, whether you're a veteran who wants to read up on where you were at a particular time or need help with your benefits, if you're interested in tracking how an administration dealt with a particular problem, we've got the documentation to help you do that. We're doing, and for those of you who are teachers or have kids or grandkids who are looking for help with especially history or civics classes, we've got some incredible documents up in a facility called Docs Teach, about 5,000 so far, of primary sources and lesson plans that have been created by teachers. There's a community developing around the use of these documents from the National Archives.
Now, while there's nothing I like hearing much more than the sound of my own voice, as my wife will attest. There are some people here who I know have some questions for you, David, and we'd like to pass the mic around and give you a chance to chat with some of the folks here.
I have a question. You talk about records and videos and photos and stuff. Where does three-dimensional records come in? In other words, I'm like particularly interested in like the preservation of plant specimens. You must have agencies in your agency bucket who have some responsibility for doing that kind of research. So I don't know, you know,
National-
when you
yeah.
interact or interface with like the Smithsonian or other kinds of archives.
We are not the Smithsonian, so they do maintain their own artifact collections. The artifacts that we have in ours are primarily presidential library artifacts. So these are gifts of state or gifts from the American public to a particular president. That's mainly the artifacts. We have some other, the Kennedy assassination, Warren Commission records have some artifacts in them. I was in Anchorage not long ago, and I discovered that we have 2 vials of gold dust in the records. So there are, you know, various kinds of things like that.
I've been considered a nuisance by some of the people that I deal with, but in the case of the 250 million documents that you've already looked at, 91% of them have already passed muster. If I were to employ the Freedom of Information Act to go for the 9% that I know, that I want to examine some of those, particularly with the CIA, since I may have a need for those, can you release those? Is there a procedure
I
where I could do
encourage
that?
you to file FOIA requests, because you help us. Because you help us force the issue with the agencies. And each one of those FOIA requests, I did talk about the fact that we have within another unit within the National Archives is the Office of Government Information Services, which is the FOIA ombuds person for you. If you're having trouble with a FOIA request with a particular agency, my office will intercede on your behalf with the agency. We also play a role in training and guiding the agencies on their handling of FOIA requests. So I encourage people to file FOIAs because it pushes the agencies. I should tell you, it's so complicated because 275 agencies, 2,400 different classification guides.
Wow. That's overwhelming.
It's obscene.
I won't argue
And
with
that's
you there.
down from 9,600 about 4 years ago.
Wow.
So we're moving towards a classification system.
Photographs and movie film degrade over time, and I imagine a lot of your paper documents are on acid paper. What's being done to preserve these records?
We have a massive preservation program and a pretty sophisticated laboratory at our facility in College Park, Maryland. We have about 1,000 square feet of space there, and in it is a state-of-the-art facility for all kinds of media, including paper. We will never, ever, I can guarantee it, we'll never catch up with this. It's huge. It's huge. So identifying those materials that are at greatest risk first, whether it's paper or electronic. You know, think of we've been collecting email from the White House since 1996, so the Reagan administration, for instance. So think of how emails were created at that time and the attachments that were used, the kinds of software that doesn't exist anymore. So we've created something called the Electronic Records Archive, which is ingesting these electronic records, and as they're ingested, identifying what the attachment, what the software was, and developing and working with an international community, developing plugins that will translate those obsolete technologies into digits that can be migrated over time. So the NASA records, for instance, that were created in the 1960s, created in a file system called EPSIDIC. EPSIDIC isn't used anymore, but we've created the translation for migrating those into digits that can be preserved over time. That's what we're up to now.
I'm curious about security and 1984 and Photoshop, and I wondered how many, since, you know, how does that fit into your thing, making sure that China can't come in and change all of our memories and all of this?
Yeah, security and authentication of the originals is a huge part of what this electronic records archive has been able to create so far. It's something that I'm particularly concerned about: vulnerability, cyber attacks, the WikiLeaks situation where classified information was shared, you know, illegally. Those kinds of things are key to the security features of this electronic record archive. I'm also concerned about security of collections in general, you know, traditional collections. And you may have read recently that we're dealing with a case where a long-term staff member, our film expert, who was with us for 40 years, stole over 1,000 films from the National Archives. He was selling them on eBay, and that's how he was caught. 40 years on the staff. And these are the worst kinds of cases, the internal theft.
Did you ever get a chance to talk to him, or was it just left up to the authorities?
It's the authorities, yeah.
And did he offer an explanation for why he thought that he could get away with that?
He did get away with it.
Well, for a while.
Because for the first time in my life, I worked in a place where my bags weren't inspected when I left. Users' bags were inspected, but my bags weren't. And anyone who works in the library knows that internal theft is huge. I mean, it's a big part of what we worry about.
And
So,
was he prosecuted for this?
yes.
And what's his status now?
Sentencing is in March. And then we're dealing with the Landau case. This guy, New Yorker, presidential scholar, visiting all these libraries all over the Northeast primarily, walked out with more than 10,000 items from libraries, historical collections, including 7 drafts of FDR speeches from the FDR Library.
And how did he pull this off?
This is this is so classic. He was so well known to the staff that he was treated like family, and you let your guard down. And that's exactly what happened. At the FDR, he brought cupcakes to the staff.
Wow.
In fact, we call him the cupcake thief. So we're now in the process. The FBI is working with us on this, and we're in the process of working through the 10,000 items to identify, as much as we can, identify who they belong to, so that we can notify these institutions who I can guarantee you don't know that they're missing these things.
It's fascinating.
So this security stuff is huge.
Hi. I had a question about the 9/11 investigation. 2 questions. I wondered if the joint intelligence report that preceded the 9/11 Commission report, do you have that information? And there were about 23 pages, I think, that were redacted, that were very controversial. So will that be...
We're trying very hard.
Are you? And then the other question I had was about the 9/11 Commission. I know that you have all of their records. Is that online accessible?
Yes.
Okay, great.
My son happens to work for Google in the books, yeah.
Really?
And he is very upset about the fact that there's problems getting everything. What is the status of that now? Will eventually everything be able to be?
The problem right now is the legal suit that the Authors Guild, the settlement that the authors and Google agreed to was thrown out of court by the New York District Court. And the problem is around what's called orphan works. That body of material that may still be under copyright, but we don't know. And Google was taking the attitude that it was okay for them to go ahead and scan them, make them available, and if someone came forward claiming copyright, then they would take it down. And that's why it was thrown out of court. There's still a great deal of controversy around the Google Book Project. There are several other activities underway now to do similar kinds of activities that aren't Google. There's something coming out of the University of Michigan called the Hathi Trust, which has taken all the Google content from the partners, created one huge database, and added even more content to it. And there's a new emerging initiative called the Digital Public Library of America, which is a public-private exercise to bring together all the digital content in this country through one portal, being funded by private foundations, the federal government, I hope, and the university community who has created a lot of this content. So there are a couple of things on the horizon. I can tell you, my 5 years working with Google was terrific.
I'm wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about the changing role of the library in the 21st century.
Sure. So I grew up in research libraries, as you know, and my 5 years at the New York Public Library was my first, introduction to the public library scene, except as a user of public libraries. And I'll be honest with you, when I arrived, I was hired as the director of the research libraries, the 4 great research libraries of the New York Public Library. And when I arrived and saw the map of the New York Public Libraries, New York Public Library is Manhattan, the Bronx, and Staten Island. Queens and Brooklyn are separate. So when I looked at the map of our libraries, 87 branches at that point, I said to the new head of the branch libraries, "This is worse than Starbucks. we got a branch on every corner. We don't need all these libraries." That was my first week on the job.
How'd that work out?
Well, she left, and they reorganized, and I became director of all of the 91 libraries. So that meant I had to get out there and meet my staff and visit all 91 libraries. And let me tell you, what a wonderful learning experience that was for me, because it gave me not only a better sense of the city, but a better appreciation for the role that each one of those libraries plays in the neighborhood they're in. Every neighborhood is different, ethnic composition, demographics, their needs are different, the collections are different, the services are different. It's an incredibly powerful organization. The acculturation work that public libraries do in a city still full of immigrants, getting them to understand how to speak English, to read and write, the economy tanking, finding jobs, the prep work on how to prepare a resume and all that kind of work that the libraries do. Fantastic social services kinds of activities that the public library do. And for that group of 3 million users, 50% of them did not have internet connectivity at home. It was the New York Public Library where they got online. It's a fantastic gift to the American public. And it just kills me that when times are tough, library budgets are the first to go. When people need libraries more than ever, it's a huge mistake to cut library budgets.
Thank you for saying that. I appreciate it as a librarian, but also a question, as you were also an archivist, the tension that you face between the 2 different frameworks in your profession, in that
I'm not an archivist, and I'm reminded of that every day by my archivists.
and Happy Archives Month.
That's right, thank you. There's a woman named Harriet, and I haven't met her yet, but I can't wait to meet her, who, when my nomination was announced, on one of the blogs said, "He's only a librarian." So there is, for those of you who don't know the code here, there is this tension between archivists and librarians, as if we do different kind of work. And when you cut it away to the basics, collect, protect, provide access, that's what we do, whether you're a librarian or an archivist. you know, the archivists have made up, sophisticated processing kinds of arrangements and tools that keep them the gatekeeper. It's the same kind of mentality that used to apply in special collections, where you needed to go through an individual to be successful in your search. And that worked in the 50s when the archives were created. It doesn't work in an electronic environment. So one of the biggest challenges now is flipping that upside down. This is part of putting the user in the middle, and what does the user need to get to the information they need. At the National Archives, our records are arranged by record group, and you can be very successful if you know what record group your information is in, but who knows record groups?
I've spent a great deal of time at the National Archives, both in Waltham and New York and in Pittsfield. And unfortunately, Pittsfield was one of the archives that you recently had to close.
And we moved the entire collection to the library there.
Yes.
Okay.
And I've spent time there as well. My question on that is, I understand that you may be moving the National Archives in New York City?
We are. We're moving into the Custom House. Very exciting.
Okay.
We're going to be sharing space with the Smithsonian.
The records for genealogists.
Yes.
And people sitting here, most of their relatives who took citizenship in New England, those records are only housed at Waltham. Are they available anywhere else?
We're digitizing more and more of them every day. So we have, as you know, I hope you know, we have all of these arrangements, Ancestry.com and Family Search, to digitize genealogy records, including those in Waltham. Genealogists and veterans, the two largest user groups. So we're huge focus on digitizing those records.
I wanted to take off on what he just said about you having to close something. You're a federal agency. Your employees are having their salaries frozen. There are cutbacks. How are you going to be able to do all that you want to do with less and less? This is very ambitious and it's wonderful. I can't wait to see the food exhibit, but it sounds like you're given a great job, a lot of things to do, but fewer and fewer dollars to do it.
You're right. And, and over time, the Archives has assumed new responsibilities without resources to fund those new. So as I said, one of the first things I did when you asked me what can I point to that I'm proudest of, it's this reorganization, transformation of the agency, which drives out all the duplicate kind of activities that make us a very inefficient organization. Over time, what has happened is that people in various parts of the agency who were dissatisfied with how an operation worked would create a shadow operation to accomplish the same business. So what we did in this reorganization is identify all of that kind of waste and create a much leaner and more agile organization, which has freed up resources. That is not the solution to the problem, however. We're now faced with a situation with a 5% cut for the coming year and asked to look at 10% also at the same time. So it's not, we have not, we're not in the situation as yet of laying off or freezing positions. Library of Congress has just announced a buyout, 350 positions at the Library of Congress. Yes, please.
Relative to that, what is the size of your staff and what is the size of your budget?
3,500 people, and as I said, in 44 facilities. Budget is about $458 million.
Could you clarify the statement you made a few minutes ago on the Waltham collection? Has that been moved from Boston?
No.
Oh, that's.
That is Boston. It's
Well,
actually
I
in
know
Waltham.
it's not. I mean, it used to be in the library right in Boston, I thought.
No.
Right in
No. Not, Waltham's been, geez, Waltham has been our record center for a long time.
Okay, thank you.
We have Pittsfield, Waltham, and the JFK. Those are our 3 facilities in Massachusetts.
Anybody else? Way in the back. Now, the JFK is in Hyannis, right?
No, it's in Dorchester.
Dorchester.
Yeah.
Thank you. My question is, do you have foreign correspondence and records in your archives, and how do you deal with that?
We have certainly foreign correspondence coming into the White House, so we have that, and we have all the treaties that were ever signed in all the languages in which they were created. We have those, but the collection is primarily English language.
Well, thank you very much for coming to New Canaan, Connecticut. And,
My pleasure.
Enlightening us. It's been most entertaining. If you had asked me as a young man, I would find the National Archives so interesting. I probably would have done it, but it's fascinating. It was fascinating to talk to you last night on the phone and fascinating to have you here. We thank you for coming out, and good luck, especially
Thank you
with
very
budget
much.
cuts. Keep it going.